That's a great topic to start the conversation around the compassionate savage.
There's lots of mics up here for just us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we already have them, so. But it's good, we can call more people up stage. I mean, we can do like Steffi yesterday, when she was just randomly, hey, you, come. So we like have plenty of mics prepared just in case.
Yeah, excellent. You can make it a party.
I like the compassionate savage and how you combine like the aggressiveness of like an entrepreneur and together with the compassion. So where do you think, I mean, you talked about ecosystem where people are best prepared. What would be your bets like in terms of places where you can find these people at this moment?
Okay, I swear it's not just because I'm sitting here, but I think Central and Eastern Europe has a real shot. The technology talent that's here is impressive. The size of the countries, I was talking to Kairi from Estonia yesterday. Obviously, the Estonian government is an icon of what you're able to pull off. But access and comfort with technology, all of those things, and a kind of a practical sense of what should be done. So I think Central Eastern Europe, and I also think Latin America. I have done my most innovative work in Latin American cities because they don't have the regulation of Western Europe and the US. I don't get cool stuff done there.
So one of the things that is like often seen is that Silicon Valley is kind of like out of touch with reality. I mean, I think products like Soylent and so on are maybe not exactly changing the world.
Yeah.
So, and you talked a bit about like innovation, all of these kind of big spaces. So I think, how do you think like companies, like people outside of Silicon Valley, if somebody's like dreaming that big, right? I mean, you're always talking about this kind of big project, right? You're not talking like, you are talking about like creating whole systems.
Yeah.
So how would you do it if you're like outside of Silicon Valley? It's like much harder to get these kind of amounts of money. So how would you do it if you're like in one of these like decentralized places and you have an idea that you want to create a food innovation that's going to like impact like 1 billion people?
I think the first thing is that Silicon Valley is amazing for making you think bigger. And you know, with a lot of the startups I see in Latin America, in Asia, here, tend to think about their own countries as markets, tend to think a little smaller. I love to challenge people outside of the US to think about how much they can push their idea. Doesn't mean that they have access to infinite capital. Elias from Telegram said something very cool yesterday, which was, Silicon Valley is almost a natural resource that everybody should feel that they can use, right? So go to the Valley, meet the people, see how it's done. It will push you to be better. That's one thing we do really well. But it won't necessarily, it'll push you to make a stronger product and a better business faster. It will not necessarily push you to be a better human. And so I think this is where we need to start thinking about, okay, I have this skill, but not enough money. Oh, should I offshore to the Ukraine? No, we should actually have a JV between a Ukrainian company and a Silicon Valley company. I think there are all these new structures that are available now, but they won't be initiated from Silicon Valley. We need the best and brightest people around to come force the companies to take a risk, or the Silicon Valley guys to take a risk on a joint venture across multiple countries.
I mean, you talked a lot about things like blockchain or something, right? Where it's about this distributed trust systems. And I mean, the reality is a lot of the blockchain technology is now created outside of the Valley, right? I mean, like the top, like, I mean, one of the Ethereum developers is actually from Cluj. So one of the core developers coming like right from the city. And
we're not even allowed to participate in ICOs in the US, so yeah.
So that's maybe a great thing for other markets. So maybe that's a very good thing that you're not.
I think it's great. I agree with you that most of the interesting companies we see in that space are not here. And also, when we talked about, you know, what is a framework for trust or what is a framework for a culture, I think blockchain is really important because what's the #1 reason we don't collaborate more today? We don't trust each other, right? The last thing I want is to be screwed by some VC. The last thing you want is to be screwed by some American. The last thing an Israeli wants is to be screwed by anybody. It's like we don't trust each other, even in our own communities. And so if we can delegate that trust to blockchain, I think that's the best possible use case of blockchain I can imagine.
Yes, I think like trust is a very big thing. And I want to touch on another thing you just said. As you said, like Silicon Valley like teaches you how to think big. So the pitch that you had is like sounded almost like Silicon Valley like a university. You go there, learn, and then you go back to your ecosystem and go and like change the world. So it sounds like almost like a place where you get like a couple of ideas. I mean, it sounds like an education. So is that something that you would advise people here to just go like a year or two to the valley and then come back, or?
I mean, I think every situation is different and every person is different, but I feel like if you're struggling with being too humble, which a lot of you are, we don't have that problem in the US, then I think it's good to go to the Valley, force yourself to learn to pitch, force yourself to use the language that maybe your own VCs think is like, oh, I don't believe that. But force yourself to get a vision that you're excited about and excites other people, and I think the Valley is great for that. Whether you come, every few months for a couple of years, or whether you come for a year, or whether, I don't know, it's different.
So we have to all prove, Deanne, that we're like compassionate savages and not like too humble and we're just all like that. So like after this, you all have to go to Deanne and pitch to her to invest in your next startup and show her that you like go right at her. So I think that would be very good. And I
only invest angel, just so we're clear. Yeah.
Well, Silicon Valley angel terms are decent for like cost structures here. So when an engineer doesn't cost you like $500,000 a year, then you're quite okay with those like initial ticket size that you're doing. Anyway, so, and another thing is like you talked about respect, right? So like you posed the question of saying like, if Steve Jobs would have had like 1/10 of the money, or Elon Musk would have 1/10 of the money, then would we respect them? So first of all, I would say like Steve Jobs was relatively poor in comparison to all the other guys. So I mean, he just had like I think like a little bit less than 10 billion, which is still fine to get around. I mean, I think he still was paying his bills. Yeah. So that's okay. But like in comparing to like all the other guys, he's like definitely like 10x below that. But I would argue also that some of the creators of the internet, like Tim Berners-Lee, Jimmy Wales, I think they have global respect, and I mean, they for sure like all doing fine for themselves, but like none of them made like even close to billions. Yeah. So I mean, why is it that like you think that people like tax so much to the monetary value of that? Because
I don't know. It's something that I think about, but I haven't come up with an answer to. But I think we need to be careful about who we admire and why, because every one of those guys has made something amazing, like a very generous gift to us in their innovation. But should it be maybe 4,000 times more wealth created for them than your average, even like working American, and the US has pretty high paying jobs? I think we have to ask ourselves how much is too much, and start sharing a little bit better. And not just sharing with who we want to share with, like it's because all of these guys are also very generous with their money, right? Lots of philanthropy, lots of venture, but should they be deciding, where 10% of a country or half of a country's GDP is going? I think we can do better to hold ourselves accountable. And governments are not going to regulate this, and the big companies won't. It has to be a movement.
Yes. So talking about the movement, talking about blockchain, so do you think there's a realistic chance that blockchain makes some part of the government go away? Because like some parts of the function of the government, like unemployment offices, healthcare, a lot of that could in theory live on the blockchain, that like people just have like insurances on there. So do you think that's an opportunity for bigger societal change?
Oh, for sure. Already you're seeing it with like property deeds and things like that in certain governments, but tax information, and I can think of lots of things. Even this notion of micro-voting on governance, how are you able to kind of say, yeah, I want our money to go here instead of there? And how do we, in principle, right, transparency is super important. If Americans saw that they pay maybe 50 times more for the same medical service as somebody in Europe, I think these are conversations that are important to have happen. If an entrepreneur in Cluj sees that your average American engineer gets X amount of money, we should be able to look across all of the different countries and ecosystems and really be able to have access to that information. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm not excited about any practical application I've seen so far.
So we'll need to figure that out.
It takes time.
So you expect there will be like a crash before it like finds its like place?
I don't even want to speculate. I mean, I can see some crashing happening already.
Yeah, it definitely has gone down quite a bit. Okay, I think one thing before I'll hammer you with more questions, I want to also have the opportunity to have the audience ask questions. So if you have questions, so luckily we have now plenty of microphones that we can use. So I'll go around and see if some of you can prove that you're really savages and ask way more meaner questions than I can to Deanne. So we'll figure out like a prize or so on if somebody asks a real mean question.
A prize for mean questions? What is that?
We'll need to make you sweat a little bit at least. So we've been like too nice here. You said so yourself. We're like all too nice and humble here, so now we'll prove you that
Okay.
not everybody is nice here.
Great.
Please, Remus.
Hi, Dan. Remus from Auto1 here. I actually have two questions. First one is, when you opened the office in the US, how did you make sure that the culture of the company was transferred to the new office? And the second question is, because when you have a startup, you don't really think about culture. And the question is, when was the point when you guys started to actually think about the culture and put it on paper and, I don't know, make sure it's being respected?
Okay, so when I started the US office, you're right, we were not thinking about culture at all. We were thinking about really the vision of what we were doing. We were already thinking about what kind of impact it could have. And it was tough, by the way, because I was the first one to open the office. I was there alone. The whole team was in Israel. Lots of, learning different cultures, different languages. It was definitely something going on there. I mean, to be honest, this is something that I've been thinking about in the last couple of years. And at Waze, we didn't start talking about culture until maybe a year ago. It's not something that was part of our DNA then, or I think any company's DNA then. But again, the tools and technologies and the entrepreneurs who have let us down with their bad behavior, I think making those public makes it even more important to come out and not just not be evil, but to be super proactive in being good.
Okay, we have the next question here.
Okay, hi, Marius from Pay24. My question is regarding Waze. How do you guys staying along with the big competitors like Google and Apple?
Oh, how do we remain a standalone app?
Along with the competitors.
So it's interesting. Waze has a very specific way that it feels to use. You feel like you're aggressive when you're using it. You feel like you have more information. You feel like you're beating other people, right? You feel like you're going faster. You feel like you know where the police are. And so it's a very different experience, and it's much deeper into the kind of driver experience than the overall broad map apps that are giving you bike directions, walking directions, all of that. So I don't know. I guess as long as we still grow, we're safe.
Okay. Any other questions? Raise your hand. Come on, this was not mean. I mean, this way,
Front row.
Oh, yes. This way, Deanne will never believe that we're savages. So I think we'll need to work a little bit on that.
Compassionate savages.
First of all, Diana, I want to congratulate you for this great presentation. I'm an HR and marketing professional, so I have some questions for you. And the first question would be, why do you like to work for Waze? Why?
Why do I like to work for Waze? So, two things. One, I've never worked with a team like Waze before, and the story of how I started working for them, as Philipp said, I was an entrepreneur. I was founder and CEO of my own map company, and I ended up in Israel to give a talk, and I gave some recommendations on their product. It was a very, very early product, and the next day, they had implemented the changes. I had never seen engineers work so fast, that kind of savage, and they never did again. But it showed me what kind of commitment they had to being able to pull this off, because we knew it was going to be hard. And then over the years, it wasn't just that commitment to action, but it becomes a family. It's really weird these days to work at the same company for 9 years, but when you've been through so much of this, our families travel together. But I left a couple months ago, actually, and I'm working on some different stuff inside of Google, and it kind of feels like I'm in startup mode again. And so this wasn't just advice I'm giving you guys, it's the advice I'm taking from myself, too, as I start this process all over again, and I'm super excited about it.
Can I put another question, please? I have a dream, and maybe someday I will have my own business. And what qualities do you need to be a great entrepreneur?
I think the first thing is perseverance. It's like the number one thing, the attitude that something might fail, or a piece of it might fail, or one thing that you try might fail, and that you know how hard it is. The second thing I would say is I think a lot of entrepreneurs depending on where you're coming from, right? Are you an engineer? Are you a product person? Are you a business person? I really think that the most successful companies come from thinking about the product, because that's really about who's using it, it's all the good stuff is really about what kind of product I'm making, or system, or. You're welcome.
Okay.
Everyone should try it once, right? I mean, even 6 months, lose some money, don't make a salary, 6 months, you get so many skills and you develop a very thick skin, right? Like, anybody could tell me anything now and I'd be like, okay, I've been through the worst of it, it's fine. It's a really crappy job, actually. Yeah.
Thanks for a very thoughtful presentation. I'm over back here.
Oh yeah, hi.
Hey. So perhaps this was already asked, I came in a little bit late, but why, in your opinion, did Google not ever integrate Waze into Google Maps? Why?
Very different product experiences, and it's not like it didn't come up. We definitely discussed it, but I think that the danger of trying to add too much into one service is that you become a very vanilla service. And so people use us for different things. Some people use both of our apps. We do share some data. So we give them our incidents, and they give us, for example, our map editor community that's really core to everything. They use Street View to be able to see, okay, where is the street? How do I draw this? So we share as much as we can, but on the product side, the teams are totally separate because our users use us in such a different way.
Okay. Do you have any? Yep, over there. I'm coming. Okay.
Hi, Diane, I'm Anna. So you talked about compassionate savages. So I would like to ask you, you showed us your plans or your thoughts for the future. I would like to ask you if you see compassionate savages in the global leaders right now and working together with AI in the future, because you said you're also interested in AI and excited for AI. And do you see retail marketplaces working together, or maps working together, like big players with startups?
So on the one hand, I think, just to start from the end, on the one hand, I think it's pretty dangerous for startups to work with big companies, depending on the stage and depending on what the nature of the relationship is. So yes, I see it over time, but I think that a network of startups starting something together is an even better way. In terms of what I see in compassionate savages, yeah, I see it around me all the time. And it's not necessarily making the headlines, but I feel like it's in the blockchain and AI communities where I see it. It's also where I see the kinds of behaviors that terrify me as well, all the most. So it's more like, who do you root for? Who do you stand behind? Who do you invest in? And trying to make sure that it's those compassionate savages, because they exist in abundance, but so does the other side. It's so Star Wars.
Yes. So with that, I have a final closing question for you. So I think, like, one of the very interesting things is that a lot of these like small startups that have been like the underdog and that could exactly be like this kind of nimble thing, like questioning the system, but now they have like mostly like become the system. So I mean, because like the companies are like the biggest tech companies in the world, right? I mean, I think they're now very dominant. I mean, nobody can say that they're just like humble small companies anymore. So what like, I mean, when you create something new about like disruption and this kind of wave, so where, like, which kind of sector do you see this still being driven very much from the tech sector, or do you see this driven like from completely different sectors? Who has the biggest shot in your case, like, to disrupt those, right? Because we had always this disruption, like the automotive companies in the 70s used to be dominating. In the 90s, you had like the telco companies dominating. Yeah. Like in the last decade, you had like the tech companies dominating. So what would be your like bet, like being in the next decade or two? What's kind of the sector that's dominating?
I think tech still dominates, but it's inside of everything else. But all of this I'm talking about could only be fueled with the kinds of technology that we have access to. But I think it doesn't have to be in Silicon Valley or in Google or in IBM. It's everywhere. But I think tech. The other thing is in healthcare, and one of it is, you know, one of the key things about Silicon Valley, which is good, has been good. It's just, fail fast, move fast, iterate, try things. When you're a medical company or when you're an AI company, those are probably not the best mantras. Like you need to be asking yourself, what do we do before we launch, right? How do we make sure that what we're doing is actually working? But I definitely think medical, biology, I think biotech is super interesting again right now.
So that's fields that you'd go into if you'd be like starting all over again.
I'm thinking about crazy things like, roads that are made from biological matter that degrade in time for the big population changes to come so we can redo our roads. These are not products I'm developing, but I'm in the like stretch your thinking mode as, there are dozens of completely new cities being developed right now from scratch. So we don't have to make the same mistakes. We can learn a lot from these kind of labs that exist today.
That's fantastic. I'm hoping that we'll soon see some of the stretcher thinking come to reality, and I can't wait to see what you're creating next. Thank you so much, Diane. It was fantastic to have you here. Thank you so much, Diane.